Echoes of the mind. It started with a whisper, faint and trembling, barely brushing the edge of perception. Kind of thing you mistake for a breeze, a distant murmur, or a stray thought of your own. Dr. Elias Grange, once respected therapist, now clawing through the decay of a withering private practice, didn't notice it during the first session. He had grown used to the dull hum of fluorescent lights, the ticking of the outdated wall clock, the way his own voice sounded tired even in silence. But during the second week with his new patient, a woman named Marla, who claimed to feel nothing anymore, not joy, not grief, not fear, he heard something beneath her words. She was describing a recurring dream of drowning in static, but behind her clinical delivery, something hissed in the quiet space between her breaths. It was a fragment of thought, unaired and raw, slithering into his consciousness like a splinter. I want to see what it feels like to peel off someone's face. Elias didn't flinch. Years of composure held his face in neutrality, but something deep inside him stirred. He hadn't imagined it. The sentence was too sharp, too precise, too alien to be his own stray musing, and Marla never said it out loud. Not once. He brushed it off as projection. Maybe she had described her dream so vividly that his own mind had created the intrusive thought. But then came the others. A man battling violent anger over his ex-wife. A teenager addicted to self-harm and nihilistic fantasies. A veteran who described sleep as war, but whose unspoken thoughts shouted louder than his lips ever did. During these sessions, Elias began to hear them. Hidden truths buried under practiced stories. Sentences laced with blood, hate, lust, and grief. Thoughts that had no filters, no masks. They poured into his mind like smoke through broken glass. It didn't stop when they left. The thoughts lingered, like stains on fabric. They repeated at night. They grew louder, angrier, more graphic, and worst of all, they started mutating. He couldn't tell where their thoughts ended and his began. He tried to drown them out with music, with alcohol, with endless television and noise. But the echoes followed him everywhere. In the shower, he heard Marla's static. In traffic, he heard the teenager whispering about, swerving into pedestrians. In his dreams, he saw the veteran smothering his family in their sleep and weeping into their lifeless bodies. Elias no longer felt like himself. He tried practicing mindfulness, journaling, even considered seeing a therapist of his own. But what would he say? I hear the minds of others, and they're turning me into something else. He barely recognized his reflection anymore. The eyes staring back at him weren't tired. They were hungry, curious, detached. The turning point came one Tuesday evening when Elias found himself standing in the hallway. His apartment, he didn't remember walking there. The knife in his hand wasn't from his kitchen. He blinked and dropped it instantly, heart pounding like a trapped animal. The voice in his head had been guiding him with such gentle confidence that it felt almost rational. Almost inevitable. She screams inside her mind every night, it had said. It would be mercy. He locked himself inside his apartment and didn't leave for 2 days. His own thoughts no longer sounded like his own. They came in multiple voices now. Some were familiar, some were foreign, some were monstrous. He stopped accepting new clients, but it didn't help. The echoes had already nested in his skull, and they fed on silence. They began speaking to each other, weaving new narratives from stolen pieces of fractured minds. Thoughts merged and twisted. New horrors emerged. Plans formed. Fantasies evolved. He felt himself being pushed further into the back seat of his own consciousness. Sometimes he would write things and find the pages later, scrawled in handwriting that looked like his butt wasn't. Drawings of people with no faces. Journals full of clinical analysis of crimes that hadn't happened yet. And in between the lines, voices spoke to him, thanking him, telling him he was the perfect host. One night, unable to bear it any longer, Elias smashed every mirror in his apartment. He feared seeing himself again, or worse, not seeing himself at all. He couldn't tell if what he was hearing was still real or a loop his mind had constructed out of madness. He didn't know if the thoughts were from patience, from something else, or if he had always carried these seeds of darkness and only needed a crack to let them out. The scariest part wasn't that he might be going insane. The scariest part was how right it all felt, how comfortably the voices fit, how much sense they made when he stopped resisting. In the end, Elias stopped trying to fight. He stopped questioning which thoughts were his. What difference did it make? When identity becomes a chorus of strangers and your sense of self dissolves into a soup of screams, the only thing left is acceptance. The echoes are no longer visitors. They are residents, tenants of his mind, architects of something far beyond comprehension. He writes now, constantly, obsessively. He no longer cares what language he uses. He doesn't sleep. He doesn't eat. Documents the echoes, not to warn anyone, not to resist, but because they want him to. And maybe they always have.